The Awakening, from the Fempiror Chronicles, by George Willson. Chapter 10. Mourning. Beth stood near a fresh grave and a grave marker that would serve until David's tombstone was completed. Less than 48 hours ago she was getting married, and now her fiancé rested in the ground in front of her. Her mind turned that day and that evening over and over, and she could only hold herself to blame for David's being out that night. She was the one who said to meet with her despite the warnings about it not being safe. Her father had never spoken to her about David's request to marry her. When he had come in from talking to David, he told her to go to bed, after which she assumed her parents had talked about it and intended to discuss it with her, David, and the Taylors the next day. The next day was yesterday, though, and she wiped the tears away again. She did not know if she would ever stop crying again. She looked at David's mother. Mary Taylor had been giving her angry glances all day. Beth did not blame her. After all, they were out at night together. Beth got home safely, and David did not. Mary had every reason to be upset. If their roles were reversed, Beth knew she would feel the same way. When she had worked with Mary on dressmaking, she felt that Mary was appreciative of Beth's willingness to learn her trade, but now Beth was sure she would never be Mary's pupil again. Beth felt someone beside her. She turned and saw Abraham. He had been near her during the funeral, and now at David's graveside. She was grateful that Abraham would be there during this difficult time. She had met both of them together, and she knew that as cousins, Abraham and David had been very close friends as well, so he would need her almost as much as she would need him. "How are you doing?" Abraham asked gently. Beth looked back at Mary. "David's mother blames me for his death," she said softly. "Maybe it was my fault." "Don't think that way," he said reassuringly. "No, if I hadn't suggested," she began, but she could not continue the thought. "If we had only come home earlier, he'd still—" Abraham gently placed his finger on her lips. It distracted her from her string of thoughts, where every thought led to the same end. If only this or that, then he would be alive right now, and maybe planning for their future. A future that would now never come. Abraham withdrew his hand quickly, almost apologetically. It occurred to her that the gesture was inappropriate, and the last thing she needed on the heels of losing one love was the rumor of her other friend being closer than friendship. Yes, Abraham was close to her, but she would not be able to see him that way. "The mayor has half the town staying up nights, everyone that can be spared, to try and catch the killer," Abraham assured her. "By the grace of God, he will be brought to justice." Beth sighed and looked at him. "Maybe he isn't dead," she said. She thought she sounded desperate, but it was an honest feeling. "I still feel like he's with me. In here." She held her hand over her heart and sighed again. She looked at the grave. "This might not be him," she suggested. "It could be anyone, couldn't it? I mean, he was charred beyond all—" She stopped short. The thought, no matter who it was still appalling to her, and made her ill thinking about it. She looked up quickly to find Mary standing directly in front of her. She had been so caught up in her thoughts, she had not noticed David's mother until just now. Their eyes locked. Mary looked like she would tear Beth apart if not for the control of civilized people. Her husband, Jonathan, was directly behind her, trying to steer her away from Beth. Beth did not try to stare her down at all. In fact, seeing her man to a teacher like this made Beth as sad as losing her beloved David. "It should have been you," Mary said angrily. To an extent, Beth agreed with this statement, but she did not respond. Beth's father was right there behind her to defend her. "That's enough," Patrick said. "He's right," Jonathan said. "Let's go." Mary gave in and allowed Jonathan to take her away. "Come on, Beth," her father said, taking her arm. Beth nodded and turned to go with him. Abraham stepped beside her again. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. Beth shook her head. "I just need to be alone for a while," she said. She felt bad about leaving him like this, but until she was able to deal with the loss, she would not be able to help him. His parents were standing nearby, and he would need to find comfort with them, though they were grieving the loss of their nephew as well. It would be some time before anyone was back to normal. Beth walked through her house into her room, hardly noticing anything the entire way. Once in her room, her sanctuary, she looked around at everything she had been doing when life was still moving the way she had planned. Everything in her life had been in the preparation of being a wife and mother. That was all she had wanted to do. Clothes that she had made and that people had given to her hung on a wooden rack along one wall of her room in a variety of sizes from baby to adult. A half-completed cross-stitch picture of a house and yard rested on a small table. A painting of her and a male without a head sat on an easel near a mirror. The unknown male was going to be David, and she had painted his form with her in the painting but left out his head to disguise their relationship. Now she wished she had finished it, and hoped she would remember his features well enough to complete it soon. She walked to her bed and sat next to the ball of yarn she had brought home 2 days ago, now attached to wooden knitting needles and a partial blanket that was very wide and appeared to have used several balls of yarn already. She had started working with it after she had brought the ball of yarn home, and had left it on her bed that night when she had gone to sleep. With everything that had happened since then, she had yet to remove it. She picked it up and remembered telling him it was their blanket for two. She held it to her chest and cried again. She felt foolish, planning for a life she would never have now. He was gone. What was left? She tossed the ball with the half-made blanket into the rack of clothes, knocking a few of them to the floor on top of the knitting. She dropped her head into her hands. Tears flowed freely as she cried again. She looked up again and turned to her window, but as she did, she noticed the blue and white dress from that night still sitting dirty in the corner of her room. She walked to the dress and picked it up. The dress represented the life she had lost. She made it under the guidance of David's mother when Beth had a purpose in life. It was the last thing she wore before she lost David. She had planned to clean it yesterday, but then her life fell apart. She touched the fabric and dirt gently. His hands had touched this garment as she wore it. She considered wearing it as is without washing off what remained of his scent, but she knew her parents would never allow it. She would wash it tomorrow and never take it off again. But tonight she would hold it close to her and remember that last night with him. She turned around on her bed and stared out the window, which faced a house to the north. But from her bed she looked through it at an angle, to gaze across the open distance to the west, and watch the last rays of the sun shine down on the fields out past Hogginstown. "What happened to you, my love?" she asked the wide-open space outside her window, feeling as if he would hear her if she tried speaking to him. "Where did you go? I can feel in my heart that we did not bury you today, but if it was not you, then where are you now? As long as the hope of your life lives within me, I can never marry another. Come back to me, my love. Come back to me." Slowly she lay down on her pillow, still staring out the window and holding her soiled dress close to her. Part of her hoped that if she kept watching, he would emerge out of the distance and come to her. Her eyes closed of their own accord, and her tears soaked her pillow again. "Come back to me," she whispered once more before she drifted off to a dreamless sleep.